Hey, this is episode number 9 of the Obsessive Creative Podcast. This is a community of relentless creators, and here we talk about what it's like to be compelled and obsessed to create things that matter. And of course, we stay away from stressful topics like Instagram, taxes, business development, all that jazz. I'm your host, Luke Leland, and before we get into the show, I wanted to tell you that we're on YouTube now. So most of the videos I'm going to try to make into videos as well, and this is the first time that I'm trying to figure out a way to record myself doing these one-on-one episodes. So we'll see how that goes. Let's get into it. Back in the day, when I was in design school, I took these classes called printmaking, and we learned all these different forms from screen printing, engraving, etching, lithograph, woodcut, lithograph, collagraphs, all these awesome ways of printing. And I actually made my very first business card for my photography business back then, and I used one of my favorite types of printing, and that was letterpress. And I still think letterpress is just the coolest thing. How traditional letterpress works is that there's this physical metal type of each letter and each punctuation in a particular typeface. And then you would take one letter at a time and you would set them in a line in order to print a sentence. And then you take ink, and ink would be applied to the type, and then that line of type would be pressed into the paper. And the really cool thing is that you could actually feel the imprint of the metal type right into the paper. So back in the day when the letterpress was the new technology, they wanted to create a way to print multiple copies of the same thing at the same time without having to hand set each piece of sentence or paragraph or newspaper or whatever you're doing. Because the process was so painstaking to take each letter at a time, it actually it was horrible on my back when I was doing it, and I was only doing maybe a paragraph at a time. And not to mention, it was painstaking and back-breaking work, but you would print the entire thing, and then you realize that all your P's and Q's are backwards. So I don't know if that's where the phrase mind your P's and Q's, but it definitely seems fitting because all the letters would be backwards in order to be printed the right way around. So when you actually got it right, it was a very exciting time. And so they invented this thing called a stereotype. And a stereotype is taking the original plate that you made that was hand set, all these little characters lined up in a row, and then they would cast that entire thing in metal so you would have an exact duplicate of what you wanted to print. And it was called the stereotype. And you'd be able to copy it and make new copies without all of the hard work of the first round. Sometimes it's easy to believe that stereotypes are the answer to all of our problems in the creative work we do. Stereotypes are really appealing in letterpress because what's the point doing the work again when all the hard work has been done the first time? So you don't have to go through this process of thinking of something to type out, the fumbling effort of putting them all together, making all these mistakes, and practice until it's ready. The entire project is easily done on this plate for you. And what I've been thinking about is this analogy between seeing other people's finished product and other people's stereotype, as it were. And it's easy to see this perfect metal, finished, seamless final project. And what happens to some of us who have this obsessive desire to create is you feel crushed and overwhelmed because their project, their stereotype looks effortless. And the final imprint is beautiful and it's perfect and there's no mistakes. And we are thrown these creative stereotypes like every 4 seconds on the internet, right? It's the portfolio age. It's that more successful, perfect version of you that you see over and over on the internet every time you click refresh. And I don't know about you, but I know for myself, it's really easy to feel like you want to give up. And what's the point in trying when you see these full, perfectly lettered newspapers or paragraphs of type or whatever you want to call it? What's the point in trying when people are already doing it way better, way shinier, way faster, way bigger, and way more popular than you? And what's the point? I don't think we have to live this way because I don't think stereotypes are the goal and the end in our creative journey. And so I think there are 4 ways that we can help ourselves from thinking that stereotypes is the goal in our creative journey. Number 1 is sometimes we need to cut ourselves off from the source of viewing all of these final perfect stereotypes. And you know, one of the main sources of these stereotypes viewing is social media, right? Being able to see all of the perfect final portfolios that you are seeing. And it's really easy when you see those things to start comparing yourself. I've had this realization in the last few months, and that's that I don't need to let a tech company dictate what my creative input is. It's amazing the tools that we have to see work and to share work, but I think even in my own life, I haven't had a control over how much input I get into my creative world. We're constantly fed new information, and I wouldn't let anyone decide what I have for breakfast every day, right? Like I want to have control over my breakfast meal. But I found that in my world of creative input, I was letting an app dictate how much I was taking in and how much inspiration I was gathering from. Because we weren't meant to see the whole world at once. We weren't meant to take in thousands of other creative people's input and then compete with that. So what would it look like if we cut ourselves off from seeing all those versions of the people that you want to copy? Inspiration, don't get me wrong, is really good. And it's a really great way to see other people's work and to be inspired to create your own version. But I don't think as humans we were ever meant to be able to take inspiration from the whole world at once because it's crippling. It's easy to create this idea of who you should be when you're constantly ingesting who other people are, especially when you only get to see their final stereotype, when you only get to see the final copy and you don't get to see all the mistakes and the P's that were Q's and the Q's that were P's. So if someone or something or some account isn't feeding your creativity, what would it look like if you just hit the mute button or the unfollow for 30 days button to give yourself a break from all the stereotypes? Okay, number 2, embrace the difficult character building. Okay, character building. Like, you couldn't get better than that. See the play on words. So characters, man, there's so many decisions in setting type manually, right? You have to decide what you're going to do. You're going to decide what it looks like, what the line spacing is, how much space you're going to put between the letters. You have so many decisions. Nothing is preset for you. You have this open journey ahead of you of putting this type together when you're doing the typesetting and not when you're just copying the stereotype. And when you go for just the copy, you lose all of that knowledge and that struggle and the learning that you would have had if you did it from the start. It's kind of like in my world, the auto mode for a camera, right? Like You can take the auto mode and you can take a shot and it looks great. You can put your camera on full manual and you might be able to get the same picture, but it takes a lot of learning to even get the basic photo down. But what's the difference in the long term between auto mode on a camera and full manual settings? And it's the fact that you get to innovate because you've learned all of the steps. You've learned the ins and the outs of the camera, and you're not just set up to take a simple shot if the writing is perfect. You're able to manipulate and change things based on your experience. You get to put your perspective into the images because you've gone through the grind. You were able to break the mold, as it were. Because there's so many happy mistakes and lessons that you get to learn along the way when you embrace the process of learning right from the beginning. And you're not so focused on that final stereotype. Number 3 is shop your local characters. Right? Like use what you have in front of you. When I was doing letterpress, I could only use the typefaces that we had in front of us. Number 1, because they were hard to find in entire alphabets because they were limited. They only had a certain amount of space to hold this stuff. And I'm sure they were expensive to find because not everyone had the same typefaces. The thing about where you are right now, the city that you live in, the country that you're in, is that even geography alone gives us all such radically different lives. I will have opportunities that you will never have, and you will have opportunities that I will never have. And unless you're present at where you are locally, you'll miss out on all those advantages that you have. Even if we grew up on the same street, we will end up being very different people because you have no idea what advantages or disadvantages you have of the people that you see on the internet. You don't know the struggles or the advantages people had while creating that stereotype. The difficulty is seeing your own advantages, because often our advantages, the things that make us different, sometimes they look like disadvantages to us. Sometimes it looks like, well, we just don't have the other thing, or we don't have the thing that we need, or I don't have the type of look or personality or whatever it is. But more often than not, the things that are right in front of you and the things right in front of your grasp are the things that make you who you are. And no one can be who you are. Number 4 is that simply the stereotype isn't the most important thing. Even though everyone sees the final products and the portfolios as the most valuable, truly, the most valuable thing is the process. Because once you learn the process, you can set up something new every time. But if all you know is how to make the final product and copy maybe what someone else has done, all you ever are able to do is make copies. The cool thing is if once you just start making decisions and you start going through that painful process of hand setting type, you will make something unique, even if it includes some mistakes, because it's not going to be perfect, right? It's not going to be the best, but it will be different because you did it. You can always find someone that has a similar idea. And you know what? It can feel really defeating when you find out someone does have something similar to you. But what if we thought of creativity in a different way? I think we so much focus on the final product and the portfolio, and those things are obviously important and vital to a creative career and creating things that really matter, because you need to have something to show the world and to gift the world. But I think there's a huge portion of it as creators that we can miss out on if all we're focused on is the stereotype. Imagine with me, you have 3 comedians. You have Jimmy Fallon, Jim Gaffigan, my personal favorite, and John Mulaney, only because I couldn't think of another Jim comedian. And imagine you got these 3 guys in a room and you ask them to all tell the same joke. So what if Jimmy Fallon came first and he told it one way and then the other 2 said, forget it. Jimmy's already told the joke. There's no point. There's no point in even trying, and no one is going to even want to hear that. It's already been done. Forget it. But why is that so ridiculous? What makes these guys special is not just the words of the joke, but it's how they digest it, and where the emphasis on different words they put, and what their personal take on it is. Because these 3 guys are so different. Because no one can be who you are. Setting type is backbreaking. Like, literally, my back was always sore while I was doing this project. And the point is not to do difficult things because they're difficult, but the creative process is hard and it's difficult. And it takes making mistakes, and it takes trying things, and it takes doing difficult things to get somewhere that's worth getting. And so if you embrace the process, that slow, painful, creative process, you will end up with something beautifully original and not just a copy. All right, thanks so much for watching this week. I hope each episode encourages you to lean into who you are as a creative and do work that matters. If you liked this video and you like this podcast, I would love for you to subscribe, maybe hit the like button, and until next week, stay obsessed.